Carson is one of the advisors to ELO and has been a great support for the last couple of years as I've gotten to know him, and I'm really thrilled that he's agreed to be one of our presenters. He's well known as the former CEO of Arrow Leadership, which is a leader of leaders. Some of you may be familiar with the program, Arrow Leadership. He is the best-selling author of a book called Mentoring Leaders, and recently released a book called Mentoring Wisdom. And again, the books are available outside. Carson will be happy to sign them. They'll also be available tonight at the bookstore for the evening session. He just completed a 3-month trip around the world. Carson has also spent over 10,000 hours one-on-one mentoring leaders. And as we know, often you hear this phrase that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in something. He is married to Brenda, has 3 adult sons and 3 grandsons. He serves on the boards of World Vision and Crossroads, and of course, very importantly, ELO. Although ELO is just slightly smaller than World Vision and Crossroads. I noticed, Carson and I were going over this. I mean, I looked at his very, very impressive bio, and I saw he was on the board of advisors of World Vision and Crossroads. I said, "Are you on the board of ELO?" Yeah, well, there wasn't. Didn't want to make too long an introduction, but anyways, he's a very valued member of ELO. And lastly, today Carson leads as executive director at First Baptist and brings his leadership and passion back downtown. So he's at First Baptist right across the street, works with Daryl, who spoke earlier today. And welcome, Carson.
Thank you. Why should anyone be led by you? In 2008, there was a book written by that title by Gareth Jones and Rob Goffey. They're both from the London School of Business. They had done a bunch of research on why do people follow leaders. And Harvard Business Review did a summary of that book, and it has become one of their most popular downloads from their site. Why should anyone be led by you? I've wanting to take some time today to give you a summary of their findings and to allow you to do just a little bit of reflection about the people that work with you and for you. So why am I here? I've spent almost 15 years spending the bulk of my time in one-on-one situations, mentoring leaders, most of them with Christian faith. I started my ministry career in the marketplace. I love the marketplace. I believe in the marketplace, and that's why I want to be involved and supportive of Rick and for this organization, and also for all of my Christian brothers and sisters who are duking it out in the hardships of what it takes to be a disciple for Christ in the midst of a business community. Currently, I am serving as the executive director at one of the most complex organizations in existence, the local church, and loving it. Now, why are you here? Well, you're here because you're probably leading people already, or you're aspiring to lead people. You're interested in the topic. It's a Christian-based conference on entrepreneurial leadership, and so you're probably seeking some insight about how to lead. But I wonder if, as you look at this topic, you might not be unlike thousands of others who have downloaded it, who actually inwardly, secretly wonder why anyone would follow them. I have spent a lot of time with both men and women leaders who behind closed doors will share this inner fear about, is somebody going to come into my office today and tear my mask away and actually see the little boy or the little girl who's sitting behind this desk? Some of them wonder, how did I get here? And I have this great team around me, but I'm really not feeling really secure about why they're following me. So it's from this platform that I want to share with you some of the items around why people might want to follow you. The first thing I want to talk about is authenticity. Leadership begins with you, and you will not succeed as a leader unless you have a really good sense of who you are. The leaders who get into great trouble, morally, ethically, business-wise, often don't have a very good sense of who they are. Inauthentic leaders are damaged goods. There's something going on. If I encounter a leader who's just not authentic, in a mentoring context, I want to get beneath that to find out what happened. How did you get damaged earlier? Let's deal with that. Authenticity is challenging for most everyone I know, talk to, and work with. There's many factors that play into this. There's family upbringing, cultural training. As we work in an increasingly multi-ethnic environment, we're always not well trained or well versed in the belief structure and how people are brought up in other cultures. We also can hold long-held beliefs about what's appropriate or inappropriate in our leadership. And then we also bring to the table our own personal fears. So when it comes to being authentic, the bottom line for most of us is that we're actually scared. We're scared to be authentic. But I want to tell you that the more we can get in touch with our own personal difficulty with being authentic, and the more able and willing we are to move past whatever stops us from being real, the more effective you're going to be as a leader. Now, there's a neat twist that's happening to us right now, and that is that we have a new generation of workers who are coming up underneath us. The new millennial generation absolutely demand authenticity, and they will not work for an inauthentic leader. And now, these are the very men and women that you're going to be wanting to hire. I also wanted to, as I reflect on this, our society actually makes it a little difficult to be authentic these days. It presents obstacles to authentic self-expression. And I wondered if maybe this new millennial generation are longing to work for authentic leaders because society itself makes it so difficult for them to be authentic. There are three pervasive problems that contribute to this issue. One is individualism. Rampant individualism has replaced authentic self-expression to a mere selfishness. To know who is authentic, human beings need some sort of a moral standard and moral values, and we as disciples of Jesus can actually bring that into the marketplace. The great corporate scandals such as Enron's fall have shown the difference between narcissism and authentic leadership. There's another instrumental reason. Philosopher Max Weber called this the mode of technical rationality. And this is the point of view that sees workers as simply a production unit. It minimizes their humanness. And it causes organizations to function as kind of a soulless piece of machinery. And then the third item is just the decline of civil society. Social bonds and community seems to be unraveling around us. And today's society is characterized by dwindling memberships in clubs, Rotary. People just are not joining things. And all sorts of informal institutions are falling apart around that. So if you and I are posers, if we want to posture ourselves as something that we are not, This new generation will sniff that out and will identify that so quickly it will startle you. The real thing will get discovered. I had an example. I had a wonderful experience of working for 5 years with a radio broadcast ministry called Insight for Living. It's with Chuck Swindoll. And I was called to a meeting in Southern California, and Chuck asked all of the team. I was working out of Vancouver, but he asked all of the team to come to this meeting, and none of us knew what it was about. And Chuck stood up in front of us, and I was sitting in the front row. And Chuck stood up in front of about 450 employees, and he said, 1 year ago, I stood before you and told you that I felt that God was calling us to move the headquarters of this ministry from Southern California to Nashville, Tennessee. And he said, I want to tell you that I was wrong. In the 12 months that have transpired, there's not been one bit of evidence that would allow me to really believe that that was God's calling on our life. And that was about the extent of his address. But I will never forget those few minutes because of the authenticity that was represented there. It also took away anything that people wanted to kick at or complain about. He just brought it out in the open, said I was wrong, and there was so much authenticity about it. I left saying that was a great model. Right there. Why is it hard to be authentic? More importantly, why is it hard for you to be authentic? Well, how about if I answer that for myself? I'm often more interested, at least on the surface, of being liked, impressing people, wanting to look good. I'm concerned more about those things than I am about being real. I worry that if I really speak my truth, the truth that I believe, if I really go for what I want, if I let it all hang out, people won't like me. I'll upset or offend them, or I won't be able to get what I truly want. Well, what specific messages have you received in your life about yourself, about being authentic, that stop you from expressing yourself fully? Why would people follow you? They'll follow you if you're authentic. The second item is they'll follow somebody who knows where the wind is blowing. Brenda and I are sailors, and here in the culture of Vancouver, we're trying to squeeze every possible sailing day that we can. In fact, it's a huge sacrifice for me to be with you here today because I could be out there. A few weeks ago, we took a couple out sailing, and there was no wind. And we were drifting around, and I kept trying to get to a place where there might pick up a bit of breeze. And as I was way off in the distance, I saw a sailboat under power that kept coming towards me. And as it got closer and closer to me, I heard a voice call out, and it said, "Carson!" And I turned around, and it was my friend Anton Donkers. And Anton, I said, what did you motor all the way out here for? And he said, well, I saw you out here with your sail up, and I just assumed that there must be some wind. Well, you know, unless you and I are really clear about our purpose and our values and are doing something that we really care about, it's difficult to act like a leader. Leadership always depends on context and on situation, and skilled leaders are realistic. They know which way the wind blows in their organizations. They watch closely for really small signals about mood and morale. Mood about your constituency, morale in terms of your team. They have an almost chameleon-like ability to change their situations and determine which elements in their current setting, they need to prioritize. The third realization we have to have if we're answering the question, who would really follow you, is that it's not positional anymore. Hierarchy is neither necessary nor sufficient to create a leader in today's context. Workplace hierarchies that once provided great stability and organizational boundaries are disappearing. Career security is not what it once was. People no longer rely on organizations or institutions. And cynicism about companies and about governments is actually hard to refute. People don't know what they believe, and they may even be in a place where they think it's folly to believe really strongly in anything. And they move around, and in this context, people sometimes turn to leaders to provide some sense of stability, of sureness, by demonstrating authenticity and interacting with them in a relational way. Now, this is difficult right now. We're in kind of a transitional sort of season with this. Our organizational structures are not keeping up with this change of relational attitude that's happening around us. The internal structures of many organizations actually encourage inauthenticity. They encourage role-playing, conformity. All of those are contrary to real authentic leadership. Another thing that works against this is that we have been inundated with leadership material and leadership recipes, and much of the common wisdom that's found in the literature on this in the last 20 years suggests that there are some general leadership characteristics that will work in absolutely every situation. And I want to say I don't believe that. Leaders do not have universal characteristics, and I have met leaders who are working incredibly well in one setting that would not work in another setting. And they don't carry with them the exact same set of characteristics. People want to follow leaders who tell stories. Great leaders use great stories to communicate with their followers. Logical analysis does not excite people. If you've ever been at a business meeting where you get the accountant to do the presentation on the logic of why we're making this decision, it doesn't really get anybody's heart pounding. Leadership depends on relationships, and relationships depend on communication. Now, we as leaders, we need to pick the right channels for communication, and we also have to pick the right content. But I would like to add to that timing is also critical. I grew up in an Irish home where we would go to my grandpa's home for supper often on a Sunday evening. And we would have supper in this little tiny dining room with our whole family there. And when the meal was over, my grandfather was a Plymouth Brethren in background and quite strict about this. So there was no electronics at all. Like that would be like radio, TV. You would never watch that on a Sunday. But after the Sunday meal, we would all go and we'd move into the sitting room, and it was storytelling time. And we would go around the circle, and everyone in the family had an opportunity to tell stories. And, you know, the best stories are the ones that are often very well paced. The timing of the delivery is a critical part of the story. And another part of it is when you choose to tell the story. When I was working at Arrow Leadership and I traveled a great deal, when I would return from a trip, we would plan a staff gathering that we just called story time. And it just gave me an opportunity to tell 3 or 4 stories about the ministry and what was happening outside the walls of the office. And it was a time that the staff loved. I loved telling the stories, and they got to share in what's happening beyond the walls of the ministry. I think that in business or in any organization, we have to be telling the stories of what's going on. It's so easy to assume that everybody knows what you know. and they don't. The next thing I want to comment on is actually the followers. You can't be a leader without followers. But I meet a lot of people who posture themselves as being leaders, and when I ask them, well, who's following you? It's I run my own business, or like I got all sorts of stories. But leadership depends on relationships, and we need to have people following. I think it's the acid test of leadership. Is anyone following you? Now, what attracts followers? I think that they're attracted by significance. There's a growing sense of people want to do something that's going to be significant. And followers need to know that their contribution to your organization is something that really matters. It's really making a difference. I think followers also like excitement. Followers want to be enthused about what's taking place. If you're in the grind season of your organization, it's hard to keep people excited. But watch for the stories that actually can lift that up a little bit. A third reason why I think people want to follow is for a sense of community. Followers want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They like to be in solidarity with others. They love the idea of a social experience that comes out of being a team. And that's what brings followers behind you. Fearless feedback. Just down the street here at Pacific Center Mall, on the second floor, there is an Apple store. And I'm an Apple person, and I'm sure that many of you have been inside an Apple store. Well, at Pacific Center Mall, at the back of the store, and most of their stores are designed like this, there's a door where people are constantly coming in and out of that back door. All of their sales reps, their business consultants, this door is constantly going in and out. So I asked a manager, what's behind the door? And he said, well, there's product back there. But he said, we also have a feedback station. And they have a counter with all of these computers set up along it. And any of the employees can go in there. And if they're on the floor and they watch one of their colleagues dealing with a customer, and they've got some feedback that they'd like to get to that employee, they slip into that back room and they type it up on the thing, and it appears on their chart. And he gave me some examples, and one of them would be that most of the feedback is actually positive feedback, saying, hey, I saw how you treated that problem with that customer, and that was fantastic. Your tone of voice, how much you cared about the company, etc. So well done. They also help each other by saying, hey, if somebody asks you that again, what I've responded in the past is to do this. I was really impressed by that, because I see a lot of organizations where the leaders actually create an environment where they don't allow people to be critical of themselves or the direction that the organization is going. You and I as leaders are ultimately responsible for the culture in the organizations that we create. And I guess I would ask you to examine your culture and to say, do we allow fearless feedback within our culture? Bottom line results. It is a mistake to suppose that the bottom line results actually prove the quality of leadership. You probably know of businesses or business leaders like this who they just happen to start the business at the right time, and it's like, this thing could not fail if Goofy was running it. No disparity towards Disney at all, but or Goofy himself. But even great leaders can fail to deliver business results. There are so many factors that press in on it. And I appreciated hearing earlier about the concept of sort of freeing yourself up to fail forward, learn from it, move on, and let's take it from there. But to think that your self-worth is measured by the bottom line is false. And I would almost take it back to the beginning of this about authenticity, because your authenticity is who you are as a child of God. And it's measured by a different kind of bottom line. Well, let me close by bringing us to Jesus for a minute. Jesus is authentic. The disciples' hope was based upon his commitment to do the things that he said he was going to do. And I think that was adequately demonstrated to them when he kept his word and he appeared to them after the resurrection. The disciples' trust increased at that time. Jesus knew and he knows where the wind is blowing. The disciples' hope was based upon his commitment to do the things he said. He kept his word. And followers of Jesus Christ understand that following him implies that we're going to share in his goals and we're going to share in his eternal purposes. He described his vision of how he hoped the disciples would one day serve the kingdom after his death. He gave a vision for them and for their lives. Jesus did not assume positional authority. He could have, and he chose not to. Jesus' impact on people and the influence on their lives was and still is astonishing. The fact that Christianity spread to most of the known world at that time and is still alive and growing 2,000 years bears a wonderful testimony to the power of God and Christ's earthly ministry, the power of that. Jesus and his ministry have powerfully touched individuals' spiritual commitment, and we see them growing. And as Rick mentioned, I traveled around the world in the global south for 3 months and visited with Christian leaders, over 200 Christian leaders in the global south. And I saw how God is pouring himself out in areas that are very humbling to look at. So I see that all of this is happening out of this relational connection that Jesus made, not a positional connection. Jesus has been able to influence individual lives intellectually, emotionally, socially, physically, and he's always focusing, as I read in the gospel, on the efforts of his mentee's relationship with God. Now, Jesus also told stories. He was a great storyteller. I think he was Irish. At times, he used provocative lectures. He also, in a multitude of settings and experience, he chose to use job shadowing, where he would take the disciples with him. As he was standing and talking with the locals, he would use things around him to help illustrate kingdom principles. Jesus also builds followers. He gave his followers the chance to make a positive impact during their life on earth that was going to be followed by eternal opportunities. He gave his disciples opportunities to preach, to teach. He encouraged them. He healed. He had them heal. And they got a chance to impact the world. And I love this particular aspect of Jesus because for me as a leader, it inspires me to get out of the way and actually bring your followers up and let them experience the impact of changing the world. Jesus encouraged fearless, loving feedback. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus offered corrective feedback to anyone who was distorted in their views or uninformed, and he wanted to kind of give another perspective to how they were living and how they were thinking. And then lastly, Jesus provides motivation and authentication that goes way beyond the bottom line. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus begins by telling the disciples who they really are. It's the Beatitudes. And if you and I were standing there and were listening to Jesus give as what Darrell calls the greatest sermon ever preached, I think that it would have rocked our self-perception, because he's speaking truth about who they really are. It pushed these disciples way beyond the status quo. And then he has, if you remember the passage, he says, you've heard it said, but I say to you, you've seen it like this, but I'm telling you it's going to be like this. He gave them a whole new understanding of relationships, and it ends with this staggering promise when he says, you are going to be perfect. He calls them away from anxiety, and he calls them away from focusing so much on that bottom line. He focuses them on going way beyond the norm to seek first the kingdom of God. And he promises that everything else they seek will come along with finding the really important reality of God's gracious and restorative rule in their life. So I want to say to us as disciples leading in the marketplace, I want to call out to you and to echo these words from Jesus and encourage you that in your life and in your leadership to seek first the kingdom of God. And all these things will follow after you. That's why people should follow you. Thank you.